Alright guys, in this video I want to talk about a few key ratios that are really important in determining the strength of a business and how it's traveling. And the three I want to focus on are debtor days, creditor days and gross profit margin. So if you've had a look at the workbook, you will have seen some of the calculations on how to work out how often a client is getting paid by their customers, which is the debtor days, how often they're paying their bills, which is creditor days, and how much margin they're making on their product, which is the gross profit margin. So why is this important and why are these ratios important? Well, it can give you a good indication of the strength of the business to begin with. If you've got 2 to 3 years worth of financials, I'd suggest that you, outside of looking at profits obviously, quickly go and do these calculations. Just run them through and find out what's been the history or how is the business tracking. So for example, let's say you've got 3 years worth of financials and you can work out that 3 years ago they were getting paid every 35 days. That's their debtor days on hand, and then that increased the year after to 45 days and then to 60 days. You can ask a question of the business owner and just say, hey, how's business going? How are your customers paying you? Are they taking longer? What's happening there? And usually you'll hear something like, oh yeah, everyone's paying late, etc., etc. What it also does is it tells you a couple of other things. One, there might be a cash flow drain on the business, and that's an opportunity to talk to them about debtor finance or an overdraft or something similar. But I'd also have a look at, when are they paying their bills? And typically what happens actually is that as they are being strung out by their clients, you'll find that their creditor days start to increase as well over the term. So, whilst they were being paid at 30 days and 45 and now 60, you'll see that they'll probably start to pay their bills a little later as well. And that's where that drag on cash flow happens. And as I said before, it's an opportunity for you to talk to the business owner about the fact that, there might be some facilities out there that you can help with, like trade finance, stock finance, debtor finance, that sort of thing. And also, it gives you a good picture of what's happening in the business so that when you're talking to bankers about why you need this funding, you can explain the story, there might be very good reasons why these things are happening. So for example, not so long ago in the mining industry, some of the larger mining companies came out and said to their subcontractors, well, we're only paying you 90 days now. And for a lot of small contractors, that's a big cash flow headache. So all of a sudden they'd invoice end of month, they wouldn't be paid for another 3 months. And that's a typical example of where debtor finance can help. But it happened very quickly, and all of a sudden in their financials, you might have seen a jump from, say, 45-day payment terms last year to all of a sudden 90 days. And if you're seeing that in financials, you can at least ask that question of the business owner as to what's happening. Now with creditor days, it doesn't always occur that they get strung out as well. In fact, some businesses have a policy that they always pay their bills and some have to. So for example, businesses that have large fuel bills, unfortunately the fuel companies don't give a lot of latitude, so they have to pay them fairly quickly, some of them within 7 and 14 days. And other businesses just like to keep really good relationships with suppliers. So in the workbook that you've got, you'll find that there's a business in there when, if you have a look at their debtor days, they'll be quite large and their creditor days are quite small. And the reason for that is that actual business has been around a long, long time, and that client has good relationships with his suppliers. He's got fairly large amounts of cash from being profitable over time, and he likes to keep his suppliers or have good relationships with those suppliers. And that means that he always pays on time. Now, it's probably not the best use of his capital, to be honest. If he extended that out a little bit, it would be better for his business. But for him, it's about relationships, and it's also, in his situation, he can say, if I need something tomorrow, I'll ring one of my suppliers, and I know it's going to be here because we always pay our bills on time. So there's those two. One is debtor days, that creates an opportunity for a discussion with the client as to what's happening in the business. Are you getting paid later, etc. And then creditor days, when are you paying your bills? Just think about this for a minute. If your clients aren't paying you for 60 days, but you have to pay your bills in 30 days, then you've got a 30-day cash flow gap. And that's where, as a broker, you've got an opportunity to step in and help them with a facility like debtor finance or an overdraft. Now, gross profit margin, why do I focus on that and not necessarily net profit? Well, net profit's obviously important, but I like to look at gross profit margin because that tells you how much money they're making on their actual product if they're selling a product. So a number of factors can influence that, and it will depend on how you're looking at the financial statements as to where the accounting firm has recorded some expenses. So for example, in a manufacturing facility, sometimes accountants will put the labour cost of the manufacturing staff up in the gross profit calculation, and others will put it down in operating expenses. So you just got to look out for that and just see whether or not sometimes a skewed profit margin may be because of different accounting standards. But let's just say that they've had a gross profit margin of 60% last year. This year it's 58, and next year they're saying, they're only going to make 50 to 55. It lets you ask the question, what's happening in the business? So, for example, some transport companies may have had fuel price increases, and they haven't passed on higher prices to their clients. And you can just ask that question of the business. Think about what business is it? What are they producing? Are you paying more for your stock? What's happening here? You don't have to sit there and talk to a business owner and say, I see your gross profit margin has decreased to 57%. That's not the way to do it. It's just work the numbers out, have a look at what the trend is, and then talk to the business owner and say, what's going on in the business? Have you found costs are rising? Have you been able to put your prices up recently? What are your margins like? What do you make? You don't have to get technical about the percentages. They know whether they're making money or not, and they can tell you. And they'll usually have a target. Now, some of them will be very specific. I've got a client who's in the digital printing industry, and he knows that he wants to make 63% or 65%, whereas others will say, look, as long as we make $100 per product, for example, then we know we're making money. And at the moment, we're making about 105. It's come down from 120, etc., etc. So using those ratios, you can first of all ask questions of the business owner, but you can also build that story so that when you're going to the bank for a facility, you can make a comment on that, because a banker will look for those things. You can say, look, debtor days have increased, this is why. Creditor days has increased, and this is why it's happening, and this is what they're doing about it. They're actually maybe employing someone to collect their bills, to get those debtor days down, or the payment or the length of payment on the creditor days has actually been a strategy that they've put in place for capital management, rather than they're just a bit loose, they haven't got any cash and they can't pay their bills. And then with gross profit margin, you can tell that story as well. You say, well, look, we expect the margin to improve next year because they've started increasing their prices. They haven't had a price increase for 2 years, and they've had freight and fuel costs increase, and that's impacted on their margins, which eventually obviously hits the bottom line, net profit. But just those three numbers are really critical. And I think if you get financial statements for a business and you're looking at a facility, any type of facility, if you just do those three calculations over the last few years, it'll tell you a story as to what's going on in the business, and you'll be able to have those meaningful discussions with business owners about what is going on, and also provide a meaningful report or proposal back to bankers in relation to the business as well.